This video is the third and final in a series covering the construction of an antique shop. I'll be covering the assembly, lighting, and the remaining decor, so let's get started. The structure of the shop is made with this octagonal room kit, and you can see it's got a bottom, it's got 5 walls, and then there's a top piece that goes on the top of the wall that helps keep the walls in place. And this particular room box measures 7.5 inches deep by 14.5 inches wide and 9 inches tall. And then I'm using a paper pack on this for some of the surfaces, and it is the Summertime in Blue paper. And it has a really rustic feel. And I chose this in particular because I wanted the shop to be kind of shabby looking. I wanted there to be beautiful antiques inside. So I like the juxtaposition of having the hard worn with the beautiful, shiny, bright things on the inside. I started with the floor, and in order to make sure that I did not get glue in the slots where the walls fit in, and so that I also knew exactly where to cut the paper so it fit with the wall, I taped off the area with the low tack blue tape, and that way I would not get glue anywhere I wasn't supposed to, because I'm bad about getting glue where I'm not supposed to. And I also had a point at which I knew where to cut the floor. And I used this paper from the pack that looks like flooring or wood, and I think it looks more dimensional if you stagger the pattern, and also if you cut it and then lay it, because the cut marks kind of give you a little bit more dimension than just a flat piece of paper. So I cut it into 1/2-inch strips, and then I applied it to the floor, as you see here, staggering. And as you can see with the blue tape out, I can tell where to cut the angle there of the wood. And I just think it gives it a better look. For the outside of the walls, I am also using a couple of different papers. And instead of just one paper, I'm using 2 different ones. There were 2 reasons for that. One, I thought it would be cool to have a little bit of variation in the pattern. One is more of a peeling paint looking paper. The other one is more like paint peeling off of wood. Or I should say the first one's more like peeling off of plaster, and the second one's like peeling off of wood. And also to make the paper go further, because they're really, in a pack, you didn't have enough to just use one paper for all the walls. So I cut it all in strips, the 2, and then I alternated between put one down, then the other one down. And they blended really well together, and it gave me that very rustic look on the outside. Again, just like with the where I taped the floor, you want to be careful not to do the paper over the tabs at the bottom and the top of the walls, because you don't want that not being able to put them in the slots, because that's blocking. Before working on the other side of the walls, we need to work on the door and the windows, and that's because I'm going to these are going to be lit, and I need to drill or poke, however you want to do that, holes into these walls in order to accommodate the lighting and to pass the cords through to the other side of the wall. And I need to do that before I do the other side of the wall, because I'm going to hide those wires in the wall by covering it up with plaster. So here you're actually seeing the finished door, and you can see the 2 coach lights on each side. And then here is the door that I actually used. I didn't use the whole piece. I just used the that center area there and the trim around it. Behind you see a flat piece with trim. And so I used the trim from the piece behind, and then I used the door part from the piece in the front. And the only reason I did is because the other is just, it was too tall. I just thought the scale wasn't quite right. So you can save that for a different project. And then if you look at the window here, you can see a finished version of the window, and you can see the lighting in it. And that window is made from a little kit that's a 3-dimensional window, and it's designed specifically to be able to put lighting in the window. And so if you look closely at this, you have a front, a solid back, you've got the panes window in the front, and then you have 4 pieces. And those pieces, 3 of them have holes. And that is so that you can run that wire out of the window in through those holes, and you can do it based on where it's most convenient. In this case, we're going to be running it through a hole on the bottom, or on the bottom side. Actually, you could do either the bottom corner or the bottom side, but I did the side. And so you have some flexibility on where you want the cord to come out based on where you're going to actually run your wire. So here you can look at the pieces of wall that we've done. We've got 2 little side pieces and 3 in the center. And I've made this chart to make it easy to see where the placement of the holes in the walls need to be. And so again, you're looking at all 4 of the, or 5, the 2 small and the 3 in the middle. And you can see where I have 2 windows and a door. And in the windows, I'm using fairy lights. And then of course on the door, I'm using the coach lights. And if you look in the middle of the door, you see the 2 red dots. That corresponds to where I'm going to punch a hole and mount the coach lights. And then the wire will go back through that hole and into on the back side to the inside of the shop. And if you look at the windows, you see that I've chosen to make sure that one of those little side pieces with a hole in it goes on the side. And the reason I picked the side as opposed to the bottom is all of those wires are going to go in the walls and be fed down as close as possible to the very center wall panel. And if you watched my video before this, I showed you one of the pieces, the pink piece that is the sideboard, and that's empty in the back, and all of the switches and the batteries and all will be hidden there, and that way you can just pull it out, turn it on, and stuff them back in there and put it back. So that's why I'm using those particular placements. Like I said, if you wanted to put it in the corner below, that's fine. I just tried to get it as close as I could to the center panel because that's where the piece of furniture is going to be, and that's where I want the wires to be. So here you can see the fairy light, and I did do some things to it to make it fit inside the window and so that you would see light all in the window. And number 1 here is the way it comes when you purchase it. Number 2, I have taken the area where the first light starts to the last light and doubled it up and then twisted it together because I need to make this smaller than it is to fit nicely in the window. And you see in red there, you know, I say do not include the section in the doubling and twisting. That's the wire part that's going to need to be on the other side of the wall. And so we need enough wire to be able to do that. And if you look at number 3, now I have doubled it again and twisted it. So it's 2 sets of doubling it, folding it in half, twisting it, and then folding it in half again and twisting it. And then here I've turned, you can see the lights, what it looks like when it's all twisted together. And then down below, you can see where I have glued. I've got the part of the window piece put together. I've got the back and the sides. And then in the red circle, that's where I have elected to have the hole at the very bottom corner. And this is going to be the window that's on the right because the hole needs to be going towards the door. And then it would be on the opposite for the other window. And I glue all that in place. And then I can, if I can pass the wire through the wall into the box and then glue it down in the box. And I actually go ahead and glue the box onto the wall. And you're going to have to do that. And I will also show you how you can work on the wall with this thing glued on it, because you've got to have the wire in place and the lights in place, because you're going to have to plaster them on the other side. So everything needs to be in place. And the same thing needs to happen with the coach lights. You need to go ahead and glue those coach lights in, have your wires going through the wall, and when we get to doing the plaster on the other side, we're just going to have to lift up both sides of the wall so that those items don't touch your table that you're working, so that they're up high while you're doing your either papering or plastering or whatever you're going to do. And then the last picture, you can see what it looks like with that wire in there, and you get this really nice light all over inside the window. For the walls, I'm going to use a plaster technique. You look at these 3 panels, you see it's just the plain chipboard. And then the second one, you see it's a combination of paper and plaster. And the third one, I have actually painted. So in order to get some kind of texture on these panels, I'll start with first putting some paper down. I like the idea of the paper kind of peeking through the plaster walls. And I've taped it down, one, so that it's easier to work with, and two, so that I do not plaster over the little tabs that are going to insert in the slots when I put it together. Although I will tell you, if you're using spackling plaster like I am, you can sand it right off. It's not a big deal if you do end up doing that. Now for this particular project, because you're doing the wiring and because you have to attach at least part of the window and also the coach lights that are going to go on either side of the door, you're not going to be able to tape this down on a table. You're going to have to put something underneath it to lift it up off the table so you don't smash the window or the coach lights. In addition to adding the paper, or you don't have to, you can just plaster, you're going to want to glue down your wires. And you want them as flat as possible, and you'll want to glue them so that they are going to go as close. For the ones that are on the windows, you want them to glue them so that they go as close as they can. You may have to glue them, I did it at an angle, to what will be the center panel. And then for the center panel with the coach lights, all you have to do is glue those down so that they just end up straight down. And here in this picture you can see how after I've plastered, what the wires look like at the bottom. So what I have here is a piece of chipboard, and for the first option I would just apply some of this on this chipboard or whatever surface you're going to do, and just wipe it very smoothly onto the piece of chipboard. And I'm just applying it evenly and making it very, very smooth, as few marks in it as I possibly can. And I would just rub that to whatever edge I was wanting to cover. You can actually pick it up sometimes and do that too, put the top of it off. And that would just give me just a very, very smooth finish. And what I can also do is once I apply this, I can also sand it and make it even smoother if I like. So I get as smooth as I can, and then I'd sand it so I'd have a very, very smooth plaster. Let that dry and sand it, and then paint it or whatever else you're going to do. Now the next one, I'm going to make it a little bit messier, not messier, but clumpier, a lot more ragged looking. And I would do the same thing. I'd start by putting all this on, the plaster on it. I'm going to do it a little bit thicker. And this time, once I smooth it out, I'm going to go in and I'm tapping it. And if you can see, it's starting to pick up bits of the plaster. And I'm just going to tap it. And then I'm very, very gently going to go over and just smooth it very gently. I don't want to lose all of that detail. And I can do it as many times as I want. If I don't get enough, let me take a little bit of plaster off this. If I don't get enough roughness and I smooth too much over, then I'll just come back and do the same thing. And you can see now I'm left with a very bumpy texture. You know, some places it's higher than other places, some places it's lower than other places. And I can just do that as many times as I want until I get it how I want it. And then of course too, I can come back in and sand it a little bit if I feel like I've got too much. But I want a really ragged look. Almost like skip troweling, but not exactly. So just do it till you feel like you get it the way you want it, till it's ragged enough. You can go back in places where it's just too smooth. And just gently go over it again until you get a very, very ragged texture. And then just let that dry. Once again, sand it if you like, and then paint it. Another option is if you want something that looks a lot more like a popcorn ceiling, then just take a brush, a stipple brush like this, and you just smooth it around and then just dab it. And this doesn't take a lot of plaster. And that's going to look something a lot more like a popcorn ceiling. Maybe not as, maybe a little bit better than a popcorn ceiling, but and you can get it as thick as you like, but you don't need it very thick. You're just giving it a little bit of texture, not much at all. Now this you would not want to sand, because you'll sand away all this texture that you added. Let it dry and paint it. For my walls, I went with the rough texture, and once I got the plastering done and I painted it this kind of a yellowish beigey color, I attached the walls to the floor, and then also attached that top piece to keep the walls in place. And you're going to have little bitty gaps between, so I added more plaster in between each one of the wall panels. And then to make it look even more aged and worn, I went in with a paintbrush and chalk and brushed the chalk all over various areas, the corners, areas around where the paper is peeking through, just to make the walls look really, really old and worn and antique. One last item about the lighting. The fairy lights come with their own, they're already connected to a battery, little plastic thing that holds the batteries, but the coach lights aren't. They're just wires. So you need to use something like this 3-volt coin battery holder terminal block, and you see the little clips. All you have to do is twist the wires together, and you can twist both the both sets of red wires from both lamps and black wires from both lamps. So you end up with 2 wires. Twist the ends together, and then you insert them in those little plastic clips, the twisted wires, black with black, red with red, and you've got power to your lights. For the roof, I have created a template for you. And if you look at the template, you can see there's a smaller triangle and then there's a larger triangle, and those 2 triangles, the base of those are the same width as each of the walls. So you have 2 of the smaller walls, and then you have 3 of the wider walls. And you'll need to print this 3 times. You'll have an extra small triangle because there's only 2 of those, but you need 3 of the other ones. And you'll notice that there's tabs, so you can use those tabs to connect the template so that you end up with a small, 3 larger ones, and then another small one. And then the other square and triangles is for the roofs that I have over the windows. So once you glue together the 3 panels, I have a free collage sheet for you of the different tiles for the roof. And you'll need to print this multiple times in order to cover the whole roof. And what I've done on the templates is I've made a line in the center at the bottom of each triangle to give you the center point. So as you lay the tiles, what you want to do is center the first one. And then if you look at this picture here, you can notice how I have started the first row hanging over the edge of the template. And that way you won't see the template behind it. And then if you look towards the left, you can see you just keep adding them side by side until you get to the edge of the template, and then you're going to want to trim that off to make it even with the triangle that you're working on, because this is going to fold slightly to go on top of the shop. And the easiest way to trim that little piece off is just simply to fold the template right where the line is between the two triangles, and then you can just snip off that excess. And you want to keep doing that until you get all the way to the top. Now, what you'll notice is that as you're doing it, you're going to get to places where when you're trying to lay down a new tile on the edges, there's just a little bit of tile to lay down. Don't worry if there's a little bit of space there. Just don't even put a tile there, because I have got capstones for you that are going to cover, that will go on the ridge between each set of triangles, and it will hide any blank spaces where you didn't put another tile, because there's just so little room for you to glue another piece on. Also notice, as I glued the tile on, your second row, you're going to want to center the next row of tiles in between the other tiles so that you get this alternating tile. So you'll start your first row, you work with the center point, but from then on, you're going to start putting a tile down in between two tiles, and you'll keep doing that, and that's how you get that varied pattern. Here you can see what the caps look like going up each of the seams and how they cover all those little open spaces up. And to age the roof, I sanded it some. I used some distressed vintage photo ink and rubbed that on there just to give it more of an aged, worn look. Now, as you get to the top, the points of the triangle are going to get so small, there's just no way to cover those. So as you see here, I've got my tiles on, I've got the ridge caps, I've put them all the way up, but then I still have some excess template at the top. All I did was I just trimmed that into a semicircle, just right along the ridge cap line, just to make it a nice, smooth semicircle, and just cut away those pieces. Before attaching the roof, I ended up adding some pieces of balsa wood to create kind of a support structure. Now, this is for looks only. It doesn't support anything. And so you can see that I'm cutting one piece that goes from one side of the room to the other, and then two other pieces. And that it looks cool, I thought. It looked better than just having this roof that's really tall and nothing in between. And what it also did was it gave me places to hang some of the lighting, and it also gave me places to sit some more of the antiques on top of this. The pieces I cut were 13 1/4 inch, 5 1/2 inch, and 5 1/2 inch. Of course, you can make it different if you want them in different places or different lengths, or you want to position the long piece wherever. But the long piece, I figured out that first, and then I cut the smaller pieces based on where I was going to attach the long piece, so that the smaller pieces went from the long piece to the back wall. For the inside of the roof, I used the paper from the paper pack, and in order to cut it out so that it fits perfectly, I went ahead and printed the template again. So I printed it 3 times. I cut out each of the triangles, and this time you don't need tabs because you don't have to put anything together. You'll just be gluing each triangle to the back side of the roof. And I just glued the template to the paper and cut those out, and then glued those to the back side of the roof. Now, additional thing that I did, just again to make it look more structural and supportive, but it isn't, you don't have to do this, it's just for looks, is I took some square long pieces of balsa wood and just glued them in between each intersection of the triangular templates for each section of the ceiling. And I just put them up there temporarily, and then mark them where they came to the edge of the roof, and then just cut them at that point. And then all the staining you see, that's the same staining I showed you in the second video, where I basically take a re-inker of the distressed stamp pads, and I put that in a squirt bottle with some water, and then I just have a box that I put the wood in, and then just spray it to give it the stain. For the door, I started out with this die-cut chipboard set. I used the inside, and then I used the outer trim on the piece behind, and I painted those 2 different colors of blue. And then I added some trim work. I added some trim work around the opening archway. And also I added a couple of panels at the bottom with a piece of Dresden. And I have the template for you if you want to do the same to your door. And then what you see, the stained glass, this comes from a collage sheet of mine, a stained glass collage sheet. And I printed it on transparency film and mounted it behind the door. And I also mounted a white piece of paper behind that too, so that you got the true colors from that, and you didn't see the paper wall behind that. And lastly, the hardware that you see, the hinges are from a collage sheet, this mini hardware collage sheet, and then you have a door handle, and that's just a metal door handle that I used. The other decor that I have not covered in the shop in the first two videos are a lot of things that are hanging on the wall. And you'll see a lot of paintings, and those come from this collage sheet, paintings collage sheet. And I printed this twice, and I cut out the frames and mounted them back on top of the picture to give it more of a dimensional look. On one of the walls is a clock, and that's made out of a piece of filigree. And then for the weights and the pendulum, I used a piece of filigree, which I used chain, and I hung the pendulum off of that. And then I used just a piece of metal that I had in my stash, and at the bottom of the pendulum is a button. So that metal piece goes right into the shank of the button. And then I glued all of that on the very back. And then you see that I have some a shell piece at the top that I added, and then those are all the gold all around the outside are flat back buttons. And then I used a paper clock face, and then I went over that with glossy accents because it's great. It dries clear and it likes to make a dome, so it looked, you know, like a real bezel would look. Also hanging on the wall is a shelf, and I stained it like I've stained all the other wood, and you see more of the dishes that you saw in the first or the second video, and also a tea set here, which is another just metal pieces that you can sand to get all the little odd bits off, and then I painted them to match the plates. And here, along with the paintings, is a shelf with a vase on it. This was white, which I painted blue, and I added gold stickers around it, and then the brass piece you see in the center, and then I bent bales to create the handles on the sides. Also in the shop is a basket with maps, and those maps come from this collage sheet here. And then there's also another painting and a clock. Now that clock comes exactly the way it is, so it's really, really pretty, and it opens up as well. And then on those structural pieces at the top, I have a lantern sitting there. It was something I showed you in the first one. And then I have a set of books, which I used that craft text paper that I have been talking about in the last video to do the suitcases. I used that, filled it with paper, made them into books, and I used some of that thin gold tape to make the gold edgings on the outside of the spine there. And then I also used the same buckle that I used in the suitcases and used the craft text to make the strap itself. And then next to that you see an eagle statue. I hope you've enjoyed these series of tutorials. I will put the link to my blog below. On my blog post for this, you'll find the free collage sheets and templates. You'll find all the other information on my new collage sheets and all of the other supplies that I used for this project.